And all of you.
Do you want that? Yep. Oops.
Thank you very much. I'll take the clicker. Corinne's the real star of the show. I'm just here to use the clicker, you know.
Not really, no.
Thanks for coming along. I'll hand over to you.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for sticking around. It's very nice to see all of you. So today we would like to share how we've been using shopper semiotic inside at Unilever. So we've done lots of shopper semiotic studies with you, Dr. Rachel Law, to really set up retail rules, to understand better, merchandising, aesthetic on shelf, purpose of the aisle, to really guide our business partners and also the retailers to really design the perfect aisle. And all those insights, we gather them and set up an app, actually an internet app, to really have a very easy checklist for very busy business partners and even more busy retailers to really stay closer to the shopper's expectations. So I'm Corinne Trentadieu. I've been working for Unilever for the past 10 years, in London mostly, and recently in Paris, in the Consumer Marketing Insight department. And I'm now the Shopping Insight manager for Unilever France. The motto of the Shopping Insight team is really to make shopping easier for our consumers. The store environment and also online can be very overwhelming, complex. You get hit with lots of information, and most of them you don't really need to. And it's really key to make shopping easier for our consumers. And for that, we need to understand them, to understand how they behave, obviously in-store and online, and also to understand, the key challenges they face, and also their expectations. So one way we've been doing that was to use shopper semiotic.
And that's where I come in. So there's me on a good hair day. If you haven't met me before, I'll just quickly introduce myself. My name is Rachel Laws. My PhD is in social psychology, so I know a lot about psychology, but also a lot about social behaviour and how people interact with each other and how they interact with brands and stores. I've been practicing commercially for 20 years now. I work on a lot of FMCG, but also in pharmaceuticals, finance, automotive, and many other interesting areas. And I wrote a couple of useful books that people are enjoying about how to do semiotics. And so my job is to come up with fresh, new insights about how we can make shopping better. And then I hand that to Corinne, and she expertly distills the really good stuff and combines it with input from other methods, and it turns into an app, right?
Yep.
Amazing. All right then. So I'm not going to do loads of theory. I'm just going to give you two real quick facts about semiotics, okay? So here's fact number one, right? Semiotics is about studying culture. So let's just quickly explain what I mean by that. Traditionally, in market research, we act like psychologists and we study individuals and the contents of their heads, right? So we use our surveys and our focus groups and our in-depth interviews to try and discover people's attitudes and beliefs and needs and motives and perceptions of brands, and we excavate all that stuff and get it out of people's heads, and that's become known as the inside-out approach to research, and it accounts for most market research, right? There's another way of going about things, a different model, which is the outside-in approach, where instead of trying to get all this stuff out of people's heads, we're instead asking, how did it get in there in the first place? Where did all these attitudes and beliefs and preferences and motivations come from? And the answer, of course, is that they come from the surrounding culture, like the microculture of this conference and the larger culture of Berlin. They come from the surrounding culture of which each consumer has no choice but to be a part. All right then, how does that become commercially useful for Unilever? Well, I'll just give you a real quick example. And when we say we're studying culture, that might sound a bit vague. So if you talk to a practitioner of seconds, they'll start talking about semiotic signs, because that's where culture is located, Okay? So a semiotic sign is a small unit of communication that is capable of delivering some sort of meaning. Okay? And so a semiotic sign could be, there's loads of semiotic signs in these brand marks, so colours, typefaces, shapes, special effects and various other things, right? And so I was involved in helping to rebrand Magnum quite recently. This is the old brand mark on the left there, the new one on the right. They're both using gold. Gold is a very reliable and time-honoured semiotic sign that communicates essentially ideas of something being a bit luxurious or premium, but it's very important to stay up to date with these things because for most consumers, this version over here on the left is now a bit too flashy, right? There's such a thing as too much, okay? It's a bit too shiny, a bit too brassy. It's not working as hard as it could, right? So consumers still like gold as a semiotic sign, but this new version has more luster, more depth. It's a bit more textured. It's a bit more interesting, more sophisticated, and that's why it's a better choice now for Magnum to keep setting itself apart from other ice creams, wouldn't you say?
Yep. So now a concrete example of using semiotic in store. So we've got two images. So the one on the left tells you about freshness, while on the right it really shows about freshness. So if we look at the image on the left, it says fresh, low price. So two contradictory or very different messages about freshness and then lower price. Also, it's on the red sign, which in semiotic really convey, the implicit cue of being cheap, lower price promotion. So it doesn't really, feel or tell anything about real freshness. Right. While on the right, if you look at the image, it's all about fruits. It feels like a bit of being in a farmer's market with, fruits being in a basket. You see a nice lighting as well. So basically, you can really see the products, the colors. It's all feel natural. And basically, the story here, nowhere is written freshness, but the story here, all the cues that you've got really convey freshness.
Exactly.
Yeah,
and the nice thing is about this that I always enjoy is that you can then verify this with consumers, right?
Yeah.
And I know, so I wrote this book about semiotics, and Karina's in this book. She interviewed extensively about how Unilever does this stuff, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And one thing that we found is that if we do some semiotics up front, that saves a lot of money down the line in consumer research, right? Because you can go in there with things that work.
Yeah, exactly, and it gives you lots of insight about what works, in terms of in written cues, basically,
exactly.
and how does it influence shoppers. Okay, so to come back to shopping, shopping can sometimes feel difficult, with very crowded stores. You can't find the right product you want to use in the recipe. You can't find the right brand. You can't always, work out, the math for the promotion. And, sometimes it's a bit of a chore, basically. But on the other hand, it can equally be quite rewarding. You go shopping and you buy a nice product or brand that you really like, and you will do that for yourself or for your children or partner. So it's really caring for let's say your family or yourself. You discover new products, new brands, new flavors. So it can be equally rewarding. So the aim for us is really how to make shopping easier, how to help people navigate in-store and online, and for that really using, trying our best to design the perfect aisle.
All right then. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to share with you 3 of Unilever's favourite semiotic insights. There are a lot. We're just going to do 3 today. And we'll leave lots of time at the end so that you can ask Corinne and me some questions. And also you've got a lovely handout in front of you with a picture of a grocery aisle on one side and some semiotic questions on the other. I encourage you to have a look at these while we're chatting. If anybody comes up with a particularly great answer to any of these questions in our little discussion session at the end, then you can have my personal copy of my book that I brought with me. All right then, Corinne, over to you.
Great. So the first shopper semiotic insight that we would like to share with you today is how to escape the warehouse. So stores can feel like sometimes, not always, but sometimes like poorly disguised warehouses. And they can be crowded, the aisle can feel quite narrow, it's difficult to find your product, visibility is not always great, lighting is not fantastic. So it's not always a nice environment where to shop. But one way to really escape this, warehouse feeling is really to focus on aesthetic of the aisle, aesthetic on shelf. And really, the key thing is to attract shoppers' attention and engage with your shopper.
Exactly. So one of the things that my clients like about semiotics is that we can take aesthetically better, isn't it, than that cramped, dark store we were looking at earlier. So one of the things that my clients like about semiotics is that you can be very precise about how it is better, what is better about this scenario. There's a very nice opticians in the Netherlands called Hofstede Optiek. You know, don't you, that the number one thing they've got going on here is curves. And it's hard to overstate how important this is because most stores, particularly everyday kind of store, is not only dark and cramped, it's also set out on a grid, right? And you have to kind of march up and down the aisles. And it leaves people feeling like unpaid warehouse workers. And that's miserable, right? So any time that you can introduce some big sweeping curves into your store, no matter what kind of a store it is, people are going to feel happier. There's so much more I could say about that, but we'll move on to the next one.
Great. So another way to escape the warehouse feeling is to ensure that your shoppers feel like a kid in a sweet shop. So meaning, feeling excited, discovering new things, new flavors, new fragrances.
That's right. So if we want to look at this semiotically, there's a couple of things going on here that are okay, So we've got this wooden piece of furniture in the back. We could maybe call it a dresser or a cabinet. It's the kind of thing that you might see in an old-fashioned sweet shop. It's going to be good. If we want to make adults feel nostalgic, this is going to be a good way to trigger those memories of what it was like when you were spending your pocket money on sweets, I also want to observe these piles of sweets in the front. So a pile of things is also a semiotic sign, right? So what is it saying? A semiotic sign means something. What does it mean? It means we've got loads. We're never going to run out of sweets. We're abundant, we're generous, you can have as many as you want. It's a really an opportunity to feel excited about the almost the kind of greedy pleasure of amassing lots of sweets for yourself.
Great. The second insight is about building in surprises. So one way to engage with your shopper is really to interact with them either via the products or in the aisle.
So important, right? Because again, if you imagine this shopper who's starting to realize that they're a warehouse worker, trundling up and down the aisles of your typical small cramped store, there's a lot of unwritten rules in place, right? And one of those rules is do not touch anything unless you mean to buy it. Okay. Now, that rule can be relaxed a little bit, like, oh, I'm not sure about this flavour of milkshake. You can kind of pick it up and handle it a bit, but you certainly can't handle everything, and you can only handle it in prescribed ways, right? So any time you introduce anything into your store which is designed to be physically interacted with, played with, and this guy's kind of jumping and climbing around and using unusual parts of his body to operate things, right? Any time you introduce some of that, then you've helped to break your consumer out of that warehouse and out of that slightly depressed mindset where they're just on railroad tracks fulfilling their shopping list.
Great. And obviously, online is not, unrest, right? It's very, very important, and even more we saw with COVID, a very important channel for all of us. So yes, and obviously we want to make sure that we engage as much as possible with our digital consumers. but in a fun way. And online, you can introduce lots of icons, gamification, or product which moves, and really to grab shoppers' attention.
Yeah, exactly. And so all of my clients who have consumer-facing brands are very preoccupied with e-commerce, as perhaps they should be. And, there's a natural tendency, isn't there, with kind of branding and fast-moving consumer goods to try and shout louder than the next guy, right? And so this applies just as much to the sort of video that you'll see on e-commerce, right? Everybody wants to make a video that's got more action and, is louder and more brightly coloured. And I'm here to say you don't need that. You don't need the explosions, and you don't need Tom Cruise in a starring role. Right? You can do
bottle, it's not.
This is Sunsilk India, also a Unilever brand. And one thing that these guys are really great at doing is picking out, they essentially create still images, and they'll pick out one element, like that halo there, or a bunch of fruit, and they'll make it vibrate. And it's really eye-catching. And you can do it in a 5-second video for Instagram, right? So you don't need an action movie just because everybody else is making action movies. Sometimes speaking in a quieter voice is a better way to get attention.
Great. And the final shopper semiotic insight we wanted to share with you today, and it's a very important one, is the sign of care. So sign of care really means that people feel, obviously customer feels cared for, but also our brand being valued. And one way, for example, is to have good lighting, like I already mentioned, to make sure that your products are visible in store. It doesn't feel, like changing the world, but it can make a difference, in a crowded store. Great.
And let's talk about this one. Now, I know the first thing that your eye is drawn to is that big heart shape there, right? So there's another semiotic sign very clearly, okay? It doesn't look anything like a real human heart, but we've all accepted and learned that a shape like that in a reddish colour means love. It's bizarre, isn't it? And that's what semiotics is all about. Right? But even without the big red heart shape, we've still got something special going on. Right? So again, if you think about that warehouse worker on railroad tracks going up and down the aisles, not touching things too much, fulfilling their shopping list, right? It's a very predictable experience. And it can often feel like you're just becoming a robot yourself, And what we've got here, in order for this to happen, some individual who is connected to that store had an idea. There was a real-life human who said, you know what I'm going to do? Because this didn't arrive intact from a factory. They said, you know what I'm going to do today? I'm going to build a tower. And what we'll do is we'll get all the red boxes and we'll put them in the middle and we'll make a heart out of it. And we'll create a large three-dimensional structure in the store that can be viewed from any angle. People can walk around it, and it'll help to break up the grid-like frame of the store. Right? Now, the really important part is that we've got evidence of some human using their imagination and making a special effort. And when your consumer or your shopper comes into the store, they know that that effort was made for them. You did this for me. And that's what I mean by signs of care. And there's not very much of it in retail. I'm now brave enough to say that. And we need to do more, and it's relatively easy and cost-effective. It doesn't have to be a big, expensive project.
Yeah. And it really triggers emotional, responses as well.
Exactly.
Great. Cool. So with everything we do in store and online, we need to consider what do we want our shoppers to think of us, to think of our brands, and whether our execution delivers that intuitively to our shoppers in store and online. And shopper semiotic really guided us to understand better those unwritten cues and how to make shopper navigation, easier, to make also better for our retailer, because then they can plan the aisle and the design of the shelf with shopper insight in mind, and how to help people really find products, the products that they are looking for more easily. And finally, for our Unilever brand as well, to be able to really convey the purpose of and the values of our brands.
And I guess that's the end of the bit where we do all the talking, and now it's time for you to do some talking. So please do ask us some questions. I know you especially want to hear from Corinne. I'm just going to flash.
Putting me on the spot.
You can ask her.
Yeah.
We've got a discount code for the book here if you like the sound of it. And also, I'd really encourage you. I would love to hear what you think, because everybody in this room can do semiotics. Okay. So if you have any comments or answers to these questions, based on this picture or anything that we looked at in the presentation, I would really love to hear about that.
Yeah, and do you agree as well? Is it something you've seen, based on your research, or,
Yeah.
I agree with most of all the points that you've said. I think it makes a lot of sense. But how much impact does Unilever have on the actual format of the shops? I don't know if I'm missing something. But, you give your stuff maybe to, Monoprix or something in France, the aisles are how they are. How much impact does Unilever have on how the shop is made?
Yeah, so basically we distill this research into story trade, and it's really how to show, for example, this one. It's in terms of promotion, having those signs here, you really grab shopper attention. So I think it's key to really make sure that, we design as much as possible shopper navigation. And I think that's important as well for retailers to understand, how our shopper can find more easily our brands and for our categories as well.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions?
Yeah. Questions, comments?
We need insight from
Insights from the back of the page.
I'm really just not good with quietness, so I always try to ask a question. This is great. I'm going to get this book, so thank you for the discount code. One of my questions is thinking about these general principles.
Yeah.
I guess my first question is how generalizable are those across categories? And my example with that is, I've been doing a lot of research in automotive and thinking of buying a car, and people don't want to be engaged or felt like they're loved. They just want to buy one online at this point. So thinking about how that's changing, and then the COVID impact. So again, engaging, and I get the emotional part, the heart, the showing them you care. But and I know you said you only showed us 3 of them, but given the world's changing, given everything's changing, is this kind of, do you still think that they're all reaching, or do you think they're slowly changing? Is that something that will update over time as culture changes and the inputs change? Yeah,
I mean, everything changes all the time, which is good, right? Because otherwise I would have been out of a job 20 years ago. I could have just written a book of dictionary of semiotic signs and then, retired, So the fact that it keeps changing is definitely a thing. So, it changes over time. So, I was talking about that Magnum logo earlier. At the time, that original logo, it looked great. It was fine. It was doing the job it needed to do. But now, it looks tacky. I'm not afraid to say that, right? It's too much. It's over the top. It's brassy. It's tacky. It's not working hard enough anymore, right? People still believe in gold like they believe in Santa, right? But it needs to have a more sophisticated appearance, a bit less in your face, a bit less obvious. So a lot of things are like that. Some things are most definitely transferable across categories and around the world. Other things are specific to certain categories. So, for example, in food, there's a whole lot of very specific concerns around things like all kinds of specific messages. Is it organic? Is it low in fat? Has it got reduced sugar? All of these things are very category specific, Or in pharmaceuticals, you've got I do so much in pharmaceuticals. It's an amazing category, right? And there you've got a whole very specific set of anxieties. Essentially, it's a trade-off between is it safe and is it effective? That's the balancing act with pharmaceuticals, right? And people, including doctors, are looking for some semiotic signs that will reassure them on both counts, right? So you've got change over time, you've got change across categories, and you've got change around different regions of the world as well. And so how do you stay on top of all that? Well, you just make it your full-time job. And by full-time job, I really do mean full-time. If I'm awake, then I'm thinking about semiotics. And since the whole world is composed of semiotics, and there's 100,000 semiotic signs in this room right now, in this not very large room, once you start, you will never ever stop. And I'm on a mission to encourage everybody to do semiotics because I know that we all can and that we've all made a start already, right? You just maybe need a little bit of help with the technical language, right? Everybody can do semiotics. I'm here to kind of share a system for doing it. And when you start, you will never ever be able to quit. And a whole new world will open up to you that will change your ideas about branding and then will change your ideas about what it means to be alive. Yeah.
How do you prioritize which cues are going to have most impact when, yes, you can use research, but potentially a lot of cues go under the radar, so people don't necessarily know which is having most impact on them. How as a semiotician, can you guide that?
Do you want to talk about that? Some of my clients like to test stuff separately. Some of my clients are very experienced with my services and now kind of trust my opinion. But do you want to talk about how Unilever handles that?
Yeah, so basically we use lots of different type of research, semiotic, qual, and then the quant research. And personally, I'm a big fan of using both sides as well. I think it's very, very important. And one thing I wanted to say, and then we use that for different channels and really to understand the high-end channels versus more discounter.
Yeah. I'm always really happy when people take my stuff and then they'll go and do some quant research or whatever, and they'll come back and go, "You were right." I'm like, "Well, yeah, I told you." That makes me really happy when that works out. So I'm all in favour of people, getting some validation after the fact.
Yeah. But it's really, to understand better, shopper behaviors and in different environments, as I was mentioning, people will have completely different expectation and behavior in a discounter stores, like for example, Aldi versus a very high-end store. So the semiotic cues will be very, very different. And it helps you with the shopper navigation, how you are going to behave in store. What are the key information you are going to look for? For example, in terms of price, if you go to a discounter store, you will have the price in big, in yellow, red, because it is what you are looking for. That's the primary information you are looking for. When if you are in a high-end store, or very, very high-end, sometimes you don't even have the price. So, it just, the semiotic cues will be very, very different. And for me, that's something I find it very, very interesting, actually.
Do we have more questions? Yep.
Hi.
Okay.
Since you were talking about testing, how do
Yeah.
you measure in the end the results? Be interested into that.
Okay.
Is it sales? Is it?
How we measure shopping navigation? But as I said, we do all kind of all range of research plan, and it will go from semiotic, which will inform how we understand shopping behavior, the right questions to ask. Then we use a lot of planogram tests. We use lots of decision trees to understand what triggers and the behaviors of shopper for certain categories. And by SKU, by channel as well. Planogram test, and then obviously sales data. So we've got a range of continuous and ad hoc research that we use.
I can maybe quote Iris. So Iris is Corinne's boss at Unilever, and Iris and Corinne kindly agreed to be interviewed for this book, And Iris memorably says in this conversation that first of all, semiotics will constantly expose you to new things, right? There's a bottomless supply of new insights, right? And she said that the more experience that she has with it, the more she comes to think of semiotics as a kind of foundational layer that sits underneath a lot of other research methods, That when you really look at it, I guess humans are humans, right? And they're persuaded by certain things. And you can get to these answers in different ways, Which says a lot of the time, when you inspect these research methods really closely, semiotics turns out to be the bedrock on which they are sitting. Now, that doesn't mean that semiotics is a replacement for all those research methods, not at all. But what it does mean is that if you become fluent in semiotics, then you've really got a head start on being able to understand what's motivating consumers and being able to kind of weave research methods together to get the best results. Does that sound right?
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Lady in the yellow cardigan at the back.
Great discussion, and thank you for giving us
Yeah,
tangible
you had the
food.
best question, and I'm going to give you my copy of this book. Yeah, it's for you, yeah.
Another lucky draw. Another giveaway. Congratulations.
It's my personal copy. I scribbled in it. It's got pages turned down in the corners. It's for you, all yours. You're very welcome.